All right, before the break, we were looking at lots and lots of different form elements for the HTML input tag. I glanced through my notes, which left the lecture notes way over there while I was standing here talking. In the notes, I did put a reminder to myself to mention the labels once. It's something that exists, but I don't use it very often myself. So it just kind of slipped my mind. I'll put it up here on the first one. If we want to make those words right before the text explicitly a label, I guess it would be good for styling or something. We can just wrap that in the label tags. The attribute we have to, there's an attribute we can use for that. If I call that a label and reload it, you know, there's no change from what it was. We have an attribute in there. We can assign that label to go with this, but we have to put in an ID. So I'm going to stick in an ID that matches the same thing as the name attribute. And we can say for that ID, and I'll come over and reload the page, and you'll notice that it doesn't have any of that. That exists. Our textbook talks about it. W3 Schools page has a thing about it, I think. Label HTML. Yeah, the official reference material has a thing about it. But it doesn't do anything different than any of our other ways of identifying text uniquely would do. It doesn't help us pass data or anything, so it just kind of exists. And you do have to have an ID in order to use it, but like we saw before the break, you have to have a name in order to do to pass things to the server. Maybe that's why I never use it. So I have to have a name to pass it to the server. So I often just use the name on the client side stuff as well, and then end up without an ID in the input tags. So we saw a whole bunch of them, ways to get just any text input, numbers, colors, more specific text input or dates. But there's still a few more things we could add. Let's see. I'll add another field set here to, again, categorize things. Which is just a box for, draws a box around it. In a lot of cases, we could do that with a border. But the useful thing about field sets is they allow legends, so we can embed a label right in it. I'll call this options. Because sometimes we don't want the user to be able to just give us anything. There's a short list of things they could give us. Maybe a drop down would be a good start. So we have a select tag, which does need an opening and closing options. Did I spell it wrong? Oh, I spelled it wrong up here. So we need opening and closing tags, and then in between them, we'll put the options that we have. And that's the name of the tag. Option. I'm set the first one, the value of just an empty string. Equals stuff. Then I'll put that in between. Equals other. Oops. The text went behind the Zoom thumbnails for a second there. You can see should follow a lot, look very familiar to the general HTML format. We have the select element, opening and closing tags on that, and then we fill that up with option elements. The first one I left blank. There's no value to, no content to the element, and then I set the value to a blank string. That's just so that the default doesn't have something there. Actually, I'll take that out and put it back in. So I'll cut that just so you can see why I put that there. Notice that the first item on the list shows up automatically. So if you want the list to start out blank without an option already there to begin with, make sure it is the very top item on the list. It's just an empty option. Where's the bottom of my page? There we go. That's probably enough. So I just added a bunch of extra stuff for so that there's a scroll bar. So that's our first way to get options. There we go. All right, I can scroll up a little. And then get that nice little drop down list and choose from the list. One from a short list of options. I guess the next one probably be several options we can choose from. Oh. And then once again, we don't have line breaks. So if you need line breaks, make sure you add those in somehow. List element, break tag, paragraph tags, whichever one you prefer to work with, something that has that line break built into it. Oh, my example has something I'm going to put up at the top instead. I don't know why that's just in a random spot in the example I'm looking at. But before we get to the other option, we saw this thing about text. And then that other thing, or that other element our textbook seems to like, that doesn't really do anything we couldn't do with other stuff. But it's there. We also have a text area tag. And well, I'll just do this. So if we don't give it any don't give it anything, just say start a text area, then end a text area. With nothing passed in between. We get the multiple line spot to type. Here are some words with things we're familiar with. So I can go ahead and hit Control C and hit enter a couple times and then paste, 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 paste. So copy and paste, highlighting. A few of the other editing features are there. That can be quite useful. If we put something in this area, some words to start with. You'll notice that's nested in there, which means you also want to be careful of putting a line break there. Okay. If you set up line breaks and indenting everywhere, you might be tempted to do that with the text area tag. But I just showed that anything that goes in between those tags shows up here. So if I click, look where the cursor's at now. It included some white space. It included this white space. All those tab indents over to where that is. And then put our cursor in what seems like a strange spot to be starting at. So that one you want to be careful with. Then we have a lot of our other attributes, like placeholder, or that grayed out hint sort of text that'll go away. Enter a lot of text. And oh yeah, it's resizable by default. Or we can make it bigger to begin with using the rows and columns for short for columns. The obvious abbreviation of columns when we know the other one is rows. And this is letter sizes. So when we say how many rows is it, that's how many characters tall is it going to be? So maybe 15. And then calls for columns. How many characters across will we go before we have a line break? I don't know, 34. Just guessing a number. So we have a nice big one to start with. And if you really like the label thing, you can put a label on that. But once again, it doesn't do anything we can't do with other tags. And it requires you to put an ID in there. I guess that's about it. That gives us a place to type a lot of text in with copy and paste and some other features we're probably familiar with. I don't know why the example I'm looking at had it way down by options. That seems like it goes up there with the text input a lot better. Let's see, what else we got? So we were talking about options. So that's a short list to choose one. But maybe we're going to let them choose a few things off the short list. To do that, we would use checkboxes, which again are back to just our regular input with type equal to checkbox. I don't know, I'm just going to put a word there next to it. Yeah. So let's put some words beside them. And you'll see we have those check boxes. We can check different numbers of them, check them, uncheck them. That one, the label might be a little bit more useful for. Probably something that assigns it so that it stays next to it. Because it can be really easy to make it confusing which label goes with which box. So at the very least, it'd be a good place to put some non-breaking spaces. If they're all in line like that. Or a break tag, I'll do that. And stack them, kind of stack them up. That's not anywhere else in this example. But you're probably going to want to do something to make sure it's very clear which checkbox goes with which label. So obviously, if we move, we can put those words in front of it just as well. I'll actually show that just in case you. Since this is a for example file, those words then input versus input and words. So definitely want to make that clear. And checkboxes, we would assign some sort of value. So like value equal 1 for the first one, value equal 2 for the second one, value equal 3 for the third one. And then when we send it to the server, square boxes usually means we can have multiple selections, right? We can have several or none. We have one, a whole bunch of them, none. There's an option on how many we can choose. So they'll each get a different name attribute. I'll just kind of match it here. Name equals second. That way, when we get it over in the server-side script, we can tell which checkboxes are checked or which ones are not. Which actually, we don't need a value here. I think I said that wrong a second ago. Let me reload this. So again, remember that all of this is our extra data. So here's our web page. When we start putting stuff in there, when we get down to the checkboxes, maybe we'll select the first and the third one, then hit submit. And then somewhere try to find it up here. So notice it put first equals 1, third equals 3. But second, which I left unchecked, did not even show up there. And that's a Boolean option. So what usually is done with checkboxes, it doesn't throw an error if we pass another value. But if we take this value off, then the one that's checked, so like if I check the second one, oh, I have to get rid of all that, don't I? Get rid of that old stuff, reload that, then hit second and submit. You'll see that the one that's checked, it has a default value. It defaults to on. And then the ones that are not checked are just left empty. That can be a little bit tricky to handle on the other side. You have to make sure it exists in the data that gets sent to you. But if it's not checked, it doesn't even get sent to the server. So you have to check that. But you get it on equal to on, so it's a quick way to check for a Boolean. Basically, if it exists, it was checked. Our other type of choices like this would be a radio button. I guess it's the last one I wanted to look at today. Again, input, type equals radio. If you wonder about that name, it's probably from way before any of y'all's time. You may have seen it in old movies or something. Like, this was kind of before my time. Some of these just still existed. So like old Alfred Hitchcock movies where we had those old radios with the dials. I mean, old radios. Like, here's your AM dial. And that's it. Like that old, back in the 50s. Maybe some in the 60s. Don't even have the AM, FM. But down below those, to help find signals, there would be some buttons that were all spring loaded, so we could only click one at a time. So if we like click this button, it would quickly move our thing over to here. And back when it was only amplitude modulation, we didn't have multiple types of modulation, we could use magnets to adjust slightly and find a signal. So it would automatically find a signal around those regions, or find a strong part of the signal. So that's where the name comes from, and we can only click one at a time. It's a very, very old thing. The people that are alive and probably remember using those, if they remember using those when they were kids, it's people like my parents' age, up in their 70s now. So kind of an old reference. But that's where that comes from. I wonder what radio button means, but that's the circle ones, and we should only be able to select one at a time. It's the circle check boxes, is the way to think about it. So one thing on these, I'll do the name in a second. I'll call it A, B, and C. Equals a radio button, a B, on a break line, a line break. Put type equals radio. The C, that's probably good. On a line break. So when we go look at our radio buttons, you'll see they're circles, but they behave like checkboxes. So we just put them on there. We can check multiple ones. Almost like checkboxes. If I click the checkbox again, it goes off. If I click the radio button again, it still stays on. They're a little bit different. The reason is that the radio buttons are intended to be a one at a time thing. Well, I erased the picture already, like those old AM radios where we could use a microphone because we were checking for the amplitude of a signal. And basically a minuscule the key components of a microphone, particularly the magnet from the microphone, could pick up where the strongest amplitude was on that dial automatically. So we didn't have to sit there and turn the knob to find it. I say we, that was way before I was born even. So with these, basically what we're going to do is make sure the computer knows there's only one of them. They all go together. So to do that, we give them all a name. Name equals, I'll say rad to abbreviate that. Oops. Name equals rad for radio button. Name equals rad for radio button. So now when we go check on it, if I click the A button, and I'll come back and click the C button, you can see that first one unchecks. So we select them one at a time by doing that. And then just like we've seen many times, we probably want an actual value to pass on. So like value equals A, value equals B, or value equals C, that we can pass on to our server script or client script, one of our scripts, so that we can do something with it. Right at the end, you'll see the radio equals A. So all that stuff up there in the URL, we generally wouldn't want that, right? Especially that password field. We definitely don't want our password being transmitted as plain text. So we wouldn't want to see it. And that is what the method of the form does. Does anybody have any questions about those inputs? I'm going to put this on the site so you can look at these and make adjustments, and hopefully you're typing along with that or something. But it's an active subject, so you want to do it. So hopefully you were typing along with the example, but this is going to be on the website here very, very shortly. Because next thing we want to do is, well, do something with the data off that script. But before we do that, we want to say, how do we get this data to the server? So our two options are, well, get or post. There's two ways we can make a request from the server. We're requesting something from a server. The terminology is just like you would use those terms in a restaurant. You went to say Applebee's and grab some dinner, and when you go to order your food, you're making a request from a server, and then that server fulfills that request when you bring your food and beverage. The way networks work follows that same pattern. Our client, in the restaurant, the other client ordering from a server, but our client makes a request of the server to process some data or to send another page, to do something. Probably not bring food since they're machines, but up until that point, the analogy kind of fits through. That's where that terminology comes from. We're going to make a request, and the client makes a request, and the server fills that request. We have two ways to make that request: either get, or really we can type it up lowercase now. It's one that goes all the way back to the origins of ARPANET, get and post. So really, for a long time, it really should have been done with you're gonna match the keyboard a couple times. This is the floating point number. So put some stuff in there, grab a different color. Yeah, just that's the text, but that'll be fine. So I'll choose all those options, hit submit. Oh, yeah, that's that email. At A.B. Oops. Now when I hit submit, so you can see that the computer, it's not intelligent validation. If it doesn't see an @ symbol and then a dot for a domain, it's going to say that's not, there's no way that could be an email address. It just looks for those couple things. I just did at A.B. But this is how it goes with get. So after our web's address, because we didn't pass in another one, at the end of our URL, we put a question mark. And I like to think of it as like a hook. Picture that. If we would have said go to run this PHP script, you would see that URL first now, and then that hook. Like we're hooking this chain of data on. And that chain of data includes the name attribute is assigned the value we put in there. Then an ampersand, and the next name attribute is assigned the value we put in there. Ampersand, next name attribute. Spaces are replaced with plus signs. So be very, very careful if your user inputs plus signs to like a text field. or someplace where there should not be a plus sign. Our colors get hexadecimal. The email shows up on there. The phone number, I just jammed that. You can see that the date type it shows is not the date type we put down here. The hint says month, day, year, but then the date going to the computer is year, month, day. Password shows that's a problem. And then the second and third were both checked, and that radio button has a value. So seeing that is very, very useful for debugging. You're definitely going to want to see that stuff when you're trying to track down a bug in your code. Make sure the right things are getting transmitted. But in general, we wouldn't want to see that. So we would use the post method. So in the opening tag of the form, set the method attribute to post. And now, ABC, so I'm going to move the slider, grab a red color, or whatever that color is, A at B dot C. We have to have at least that much, or the computer's going to say it's not an email. 987-654-3210. Carlos date. I just type password in there. I didn't do anything fancy. I just wanted to explicitly type something. But once our form's filled out and we submit it, where's all that stuff still there? Oh, I think I know why. Yeah. So it's still showing when we just say post. We need to send that somewhere else. And that's where our action comes in. Actually, let me see if the capital letters do make a difference. There's all that when I hit submit. Oh, I think that was just there because it was still left over. That was my thought. For many, many decades, we had to type post in all uppercase letters, but I don't think we do anymore. And all that stuff was left in the URL. I forgot to clear it out of there. But now with that cleared out of there, I start typing some stuff. Oh, and the slider can be either integers or floating point numbers. It just depends on how you set your minimum and maximum point, and then the computer just divides it up by that much. The password 987-694-1. Carl's date. Password. Choose this option, a couple of these options, and one of these. There you go. Once we have the data and we hit submit, there we go. Now with post, we don't see that attached to the URL. So once you're ready for production, you probably want to do that unless it's something that really doesn't matter. For example, a Google search. Funny cat videos. Okay. Notice we get that Google/search is the script that ran. Then we get that question mark. And we get our data back kind of the same way, in that same format we were just looking at. Because obviously the person who just put those search results in, it's not going to hurt at all if they see them in the event. And useful for this class, because then if you want to link to some search results, like a specific page of search results, you can just put that in your hyperlink reference, because it is a URL that exists on the internet. Find it again. But in general, especially if there's a password, we don't want that to be seen. We want to send it to another script. And the script we call it with our action attribute of the form. So method is how are we sending it, and action is what are we doing. I'm just going to call it my script.php. And real quick, I'll create a new file and go ahead and create this, but there's sort of an issue. So we'll give it a name, myscript.php. And PHP, it goes with HTML. So we get this, it looks like a tag. And then we add some question marks in there for some extra stuff. And we can put HTML in a PHP script. I'll just put a level 1 header. This is some HTML. And then the PHP, I'll add just a simple echo thing. So one of our commands is echo. That echoes something from the server back to the client. These words come from the script. And typically we will intermingle some HTML code into the PHP. That way the results of the script look nice. We mix them together. Yeah. Now if I go over here though, the icon didn't change like it did for the style sheet and the, right? If I go try to click this, it knows to open the CSS with a text editor. And we already saw if I double click that one, it knows to open that with the browser, the HTML file. The PHP script got that blank thing. It doesn't know what to open it with. It doesn't even have a guess on what to open it with. Usually we at least get a couple guesses there before the more apps button. Oh, maybe I just type this in directly. It's in the same folder as this. So we just open my script.php. Well, the browser found the file. Doesn't look like it did anything though, right? And that's because PHP has to run on a server. Either a virtual server. My favorite one is XAMPP. We'll probably take a look at a few more PHP, just echo than just saying this is PHP exists here on Thursday. XAMPP installers. This is my favorite one to run a virtual one, so I might install it before then, but it's a virtual local host server. So it's an Apache server, MySQL. It's got an email server and some other ones on there. I only ever use the Apache and MySQL, but it gives us a local way to test that stuff. Otherwise, you're going to want to upload it to a domain somewhere so you can use it. So I'm going to come over here and sign in to this Affinity free account. Because WordPress uses PHP, most of your free domain hosting sites should be okay with it by default, because they're going to expect people made their websites on WordPress and Wix. Both of those, Wix has been growing in popularity. I guess I can't really rule them out. I'm going to mention companies explicitly. I should mention more than one. I'll bring that up here. Now I can go to that site. Here's the site, which is that default thing. Here's our folder from today. Here's the forms page. But notice what happens when I run that PHP script here. On the server, we get something different. Right? We don't just see that the same text we typed. If we look at the page source, we see that HTML code. The angle brackets and the question mark from the PHP tag are gone, but we see what got echoed back. So it runs on the server, but it doesn't. It runs on the server, not a client. So anything with the PHP script does have to run that way. Can I do the whole array at once? Get the name right. Okay, so I'm going to go over here to this, and I'm going to echo some stuff back. The text field says it's C++, so it's flavor C++, so we use our dot for concatenation. Concatenation, if you haven't seen it, that means add two strings together. Plus sign is very, very common. But plus sign has more meanings in C++ than it does in some other languages. And that's always the first one that gets overloaded. So programmers put their own meaning to it as well. But for some reason, it's pretty common to use dot for concatenation. And we're going to add to that whatever was in the post one with the words field. Whatever got posted to the server, whatever came via post method, assigned the name words, we'll get that go back. So, oh, and then C++, so we need a end of character instruction. In this case, I was able to get away without an error from missing semicolon because that's the only line. So obviously, when we get to the end of that line, that's the end of the instruction. That only works on the very last line, or when there's only one line. So now I need to re-upload that. So I come over here and just overwrite that file. So it's changed. Upload and replace. So now if I go over to the forms page, see that forms, and this is the only one because we've been at this for a while. Words in the HTML form. So now when I go hit submit, oh, where's the submit button? There it is. And submit. Notice we got those words that I just typed into the form. Sent right back to the page. And we call it an associative array in PHP. There's multiple names for storing data like this. It's the one with key value pairs. The name is your keyword, and the array itself, it's a loosely typed language. We can spot that, so we don't have to worry about type. The $ usually indicates we're in a loosely typed language, so we don't have to worry about any data type. They're all the same: integers, booleans, strings. custom ones, whatever, they're all the same type of data to a loosely typed language. Then our array is called underscore post. Then our indexing is the name attribute from that field. So some people may not have seen that in another class yet, but I know several of you all will know what all those words I just said mean. And in C++, so it really is an array, not a list that we call an array. It's C++. The color field has concatenated with whatever is in our post array. I think I call it colors. Check that. I have to find it on here. My value name is colors. And I'll throw a date on there. That'd be good for the example here. And it's C++, so don't forget your end of instruction character. So echo back. So the client made a request. They put in, passed some information. So using the client server in a restaurant thing, like they paid us already, they paid us some data, made a request, and they want this coming back. So usually there'd be some processing on that data first, right? But for today's example, we'll just echo it right back. Maybe one more line. The date field is for concatenated with our post array. Did I call it date? Oh, I call it someday then. Someday in camel case. Someday. End of instruction. Definitely got to remember the end of instruction character for C++. Now if I re-upload that, drag that over, replace the previous one. Go back to the form. Reload this so that it clears out there. This is my form. What did I use? Color? That one's coming back. Okay, that looks like a nice shade of green. And date. Do some stuff on the other one. So we'll do Thursday's date where we'll pick up from here and look at some basic syntax. A quick class and some basic ideas like how we do a selection, how we do a loop. What does a normal variable look like so I can pull it out of that array? Some basic passes, PHP and then JavaScript. Then we'll see the server side and client side scripting. Might look at a file handler because that's the big difference. We cannot write a file to somebody else's client machine. So if we want to store the data, like in a file or a database or something, we have to do that on the server. So we'll probably look at that in our basic example. Okay, there's some stuff, so I'll submit that. Oh, probably could have used some line breaks there. Okay. Let's edit that in. And Infinity Free has this nice, has an editor right in it. And then it's actually a pretty decent text editor that they have here. So don't just echo those back. Echo those back with a paragraph tag. Because we know it's echoing back to an HTML page. And I guess this is the first glimpse, so I can concatenate that with a closing paragraph tag. And copy all of that. But this is our, I guess, kind of our first glance of that thing I've already alluded to a couple times this semester. We're studying HTML, learning it. We need to dive in and do it all as we're learning it. But ultimately, we're going to write other code that writes that code. This is coming from the server. Not really a need to ever store a file and waste a bunch of space on this, or file server, if we have a script as well, we can just put it all in the script and echo back some HTML code in it. So we write other code that writes our HTML code. Ultimately, you'll see that a lot more often. That's the path this class is part of. Oh yes, then reload, and I want to confirm, I want to reload it with that same data that was just sent to the server. So we don't have to go back and edit it all in. There we go. Now if I view the page source, you'll see that we get things that look like HTML code. We're just gonna go back all those tags along with the strings. Or to take that a step further and finish up what I was saying here, that hexadecimal is not going to mean much to most people. So maybe we could do something with that. I'll throw in an input tag, type equals color. I need escape sequences, so backslashes. Actually, could have used single quote marks and avoided the escape sequence. But another HTML code right in that echo. The type equals color. And value equals an opening quotation mark. Then we're going to stick in whatever we pass to the server, and then a closing quote mark, and end that tag. Oops. Does what I did there make sense? If you haven't seen backslash before, that's called an escape sequence. A quotation mark means something very, very explicit to this programming language. So if we actually want to type a quotation mark in our words that we're echoing back, we have to escape out of the programming language, put that quotation mark, and then come back to the language. So the standard for that is a backslash. The obvious trade-off is if we actually want to type a backslash, we have to put 2 backslashes. So we're going to add in that color input tag like we saw, but give it a default value of whatever was passed in. Save that, because that's not going to mean much to a human. Resubmit that. You see, then that's a nice way to display that color back. That way the user, when we ask the user, is all this data right? If there's a color amongst that data, they can see it that way. Which is the thing I've alluded to and have been anxious to talk about. Ultimately, we're going to write code that writes this HTML code we're studying here. But before we can put this in other code, we have to learn it really well. So that's what we're doing in this class. And that was quite a bit today. We're going to look at we're going to look at PHP and JavaScript. Now that we've seen forms and seen how to get some input from the user, I guess I have to go back. Now that we've seen some ways to get input from a user and have some buttons to click on, we can start doing stuff. Those are 2 separate classes. Spend an entire 8 weeks or 16 weeks studying that explicitly for both client, for each side, the client side and the server side. But we'll introduce that on Tuesday so that our sites can do more than just show the same thing every time. I'm thinking like a little tip calculator, probably just some couple, like a number box, enter the price of the food meal, then a slider with some a smiling and frowning emoji, and they can slide back and forth, and it's somewhere between 10 and 30% tip or something. And then output that for the client side one. And then the server side one, we'll just throw some random input there and write a file. Maybe even just a text area. Then we can make a text editor and just whatever gets typed in there gets saved to a text file on the server. Maybe echo back a button to download it or something. Yeah, adding it to the link might be a little tricky. Wouldn't be too bad. I guess all we really need to do is go to this. We leave this page here, don't have anything called index, then we could just write a text file to this same directory and download it from here. That'd be a very easy thing to do with just that text area. But we'll come up with something between now and then. I'll come up with something between now and then to see some our basic scripting tools for both the client and server side. So then our websites can do something. But this is an active subject, so knowing that we're going to, later this week, we're going to take some input from a user and do something with it. A good thing for lab time today might be to, if you have an idea of a small app you want to make to practice this stuff, go ahead and put that form together so that when we look at the scripting stuff in a couple days, later this week, you'll have the user interface ready for it. And then you can just throw the script on there and have a web page that does something. Your homework, they just give you one that the author built. Be careful when you type the name in there. Every one of the homework assignments I've seen from that so far has gotten a typo from typing in whether in those instructions. The same typo, which if you stare really hard at that address should be obvious what's going on. But for those who have turned it in, if you don't see it, so I'll fill you in. That should let you know. But putting together some forms or a user interface for a small script you might have, web-based app you might have in mind that can be built with the basic components we'll see on Thursday. That'd be my recommendation for lab time. Get used to the form elements. There's homework due on Thursday though, so it could also be used for that time. As always, please use our remaining time productively. So I call it lab time. Studying our subject. Text messages and IB Learn messages are two things that make noise on my phone. And from now to 4:50, I'll just be sitting in my office ready to jump back on the Zoom call in a split second if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, does anybody have any questions today? Okay, I assume the silence means no questions, so I will see you all on Thursday. Have a good afternoon. I believe it's some nice weather out there. Weather report I saw said was might be a good idea, good day to go outside too. And I'll see you all on Thursday.